Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining the second edition or second in the series for the Symantec IGA best practices. Chris is going to be talking to you guys in just a second. I just wanted to update you on a couple of things. I dropped in chat a little links to a couple of videos that the product management team has released to help with the migration for VApp. So one is a side-by-side migration, the other one's a gradual migration. So if you're running VApp and you're interested in getting some good advice on how to migrate that to the latest edition version, go ahead and click on those links. They're both, the videos are up on YouTube. I've also put a link in there for the Mohegan Sun event, which is going to occur on September 29th at the Mohegan Sun Casino and Resort in Connecticut. So if we have any people on live attendee that are watching this that are up in that region would like to drive down and come to the identity track, Chris is going to be doing a session there as well. For the IGA breakout session. You can click on that link and you can look at the entire agenda and register for the event. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for coming out for our second installment of IGA best practices. Today, we're going to be talking about technical best practices. Here's the agenda for today. Obviously, we just did introductions. We're going to talk about what is IGA, why are best practices important, caveats. So basically, one size does not fit all. Is when we talk about recommendations and best practices, we just want to have some constraints around what we're providing, information we're providing there. We're going to start off with a reference architecture to frame up what we're going to be discussing today, and refer back to that as necessary. General technical best practices, as well as product specific. So product specific meaning identity manager versus portal versus directory and so on. All right. So I guess a little bit about myself. I'm the principal at Secure Identity Solutions. I've been working in the identity and access management space since 1999. Over the past 20 plus years, I've helped organizations design and reimagine their identity and access management infrastructures. We're often brought in to handle very complex and broad implementations. So let's go on. So I'm with Secure Identity Solutions, but we're partners obviously with ANI Solutions. They're a Broadcom strategic and expert advantage partner, founded in 1999. They have many areas of focus, including security, continuous delivery, continuous testing, and so on, as you guys can see here. And obviously, Secure Identity Solutions, we specialize in the identity and access management space. So all of our solutions and services are focused around providing customers with the best possible tool sets and solutions in that space. All right. Okay. So what is identity and access, identity governance, or IGA, right? So there are three core products that kind of make up the suite. Identity manager, identity governance, and identity portal. Now, at SIS, we really like to talk about it as there are some other key pieces of this, such as the CA directory, or excuse me, Symantec directory and reporting, right? Because there's very few organizations that don't leverage those pieces when they leverage the suite. And so when we talk about best practices, we're going to cover the entirety of what we consider, the core pieces, which do include the Symantec directory. All right. Symantec directory and the reporting. Let's go to the next one. So User provisioning. So we talk about IGA, we talk about the solution sets. We talk about self-service, user provisioning, access requests, identity governance, mobile, express technologies kind of make up what Symantec IGA is. This is the core value proposition that many of you are looking for. You're looking to automate, you're looking to make users self-sufficient, you're looking to give them on-the-go access, you're looking to provide governance for the accounts that are managed by this infrastructure, right? You're looking to deploy quickly with express technologies. So these are the value props that make up IGA. So these aren't the individual pieces per se, but these are the core strengths that this tool brings to the market and where it differentiates itself from other products. So one of the things that we talk about is the challenges, right? Why? So challenges include data privacy laws, privileged access governance, security compliance, least privileged access, and that's what this suite is designed to address. All right. So why are best practices important, right? What are they, right? I guess for the most part. So they're going to be rule of thumb. They're going to be things that we have learned over our 20 plus years of doing this. We have things that provide customers with the ability to be successful in challenging environments. These are going to be the things that were learned through blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, and things that have been, worked on, improved over the years as well. Because it's important to understand that you may take an approach that may not be the optimal approach, but we then, you refine it and you improve it to ensure that you can get a sustainable result from a deployment. So we always kind of like to provide the stories behind why we do things, right? And so best practices allow us to formalize those stories about these types of implementations. All right. So get on. All right. Let's talk about caveats to what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to speak at a high level about this solution set. But we also realize that requirements are different are different between customers. They're different between environments. They're different between the maturity of a customer's environment. For example, if you are new to the identity and access management space, then your requirements and needs are going to be different than an organization that spent 15 plus years developing a solution and implementing it in care and feeding, because you're not going to be able to reach that level of maturity right out the gate, because organizations need time, there's a learning curve, there's things that surround that make it a very not personal but organizational specific situation. Okay, so I just said that each system is unique, right? So whether someone has Active Directory, they have Azure, they have AWS, they could have Linux, they could have all these different things. So you can have the same end components as the next customer, but the business requirement is different. It's dictated by what the industry says, what your organization says, what type of constraints that you may have, or what type of organization you are, right? So if you have to comply with SOX, you will have certain requirements versus an organization that is concerned with high trust, right? They're going to have different requirements. Right? And when we talk about, we're not talking about you, we're talking about, this is not the recommendations we're talking about span multiple customers, multiple types of environments, and we're kind of aggregating some of the ones that we feel that are going to be most beneficial for us to discuss today. All right. And any numbers that we talk about today, as far as recommendations around size, recommendations around performance, are really going to be based on things that we've seen. Okay, and we understand that they're going to be, this is more of a recipe where you need a chef that is experienced and understands when to add more salt, when to add more sugar, fat, and so on. And that's what you should really look at these things, the approach that you should take when looking at these things. All right. And that's just our disclaimer, consult your doctor. All right. So let's talk about reference architecture, right? And this is I realize this is a very busy picture here. So when we talk about the suite, we talk about what are the logical pieces of the architecture. So this is not necessarily representing a physical layout, but more of the architecture from a logical perspective, right? So I have to the far left, I start with a web proxy. How do customers, vendors, whoever interact with the identity portal, identity governance at the top, identity manager, right? That's how they come in to hit a solution, right? And we also got to imagine that in a 3-tier data network, that you're going to have firewalls, you're going to have network segmentation, wrapped around this as well. So, and as we talk about, we like to show that identity portal does communicate with identity governance and identity manager, and there's this interconnected ecosystem that all of these components kind of rely on, right, to do what they have to do. All right, and so we're going to talk about some of these areas as well. So when we talk about when we talk about architecture, obviously this is logical, but we're always going to say multiple sites, right, is a best practice. You want to have multiple sites, 2 at a minimum, and then within an environment, you're going to have multiple of every type of server you can, right? That's going to give you the most resilient, that's going to give you the most robust architecture possible. And you're also going to give you the if you take these steps, you'll be in a position to handle the unknowns, right? If you look at, hey, I don't really need 2 servers, but if I implement 2 servers, hey, if there is a disaster or I take on more load, I can handle those things, right? So we always like to look forward when we look at architecture, not where you are today, but where will you be 3 years from now in using these technologies, all right? So if you guys know SIS, the one thing that we harp on a lot is documentation. And we like to make sure that any clarification of details for now and the future are completely understood by everyone involved. And one of the key things that we know is that if we arrive at an enterprise and they have an identity and access management solution, regardless of the vendor, that if there's no documentation, then that environment is going to be in distress, because there's going to be a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty about what can be changed, when it could be changed, who did it, and why it was done that way, right? So we like to take the approach of, what are we building? Okay. And those are requirements. What are we building? And then how does what I'm building map to the components, right? Where does that lie? All right. And my business partner always is focused on this following statement: when presented with a choice, a design choice for ease of operation or ease of deployment, choose ease of operation, because that is going to provide you the most reliable and most easily maintainable solution going forward. And sometimes that's a hard choice because people want to get it out faster. So we will always err on the side of, let's make it easily maintainable over its lifetime versus, easy solution to deploy, because you only have to deploy once if you do it right? But you have to live with this solution every day, right? Additionally, for documentation, we talk about, what have we built, right? For example, we like to document things within Identity Manager, such as which task ties to which role, which PX is triggered by which task. Where do we use static credentials throughout the configuration? For example, in a PX or something like reference. And that goes back to, how do we name things? How do we track things? And putting together a matrix of these types of items will greatly enhance the maintainability of a solution, of any solution for that matter, right? Now, the other thing is understanding how things work, right? So if you document how things work, guess what becomes easier? Understanding what are in logs, right? Because when you look at logging, you get to understand, okay, what talks to what where are failures. But if you lack the understanding of what you've built, why you've made certain choices, and what things are called, logging is not going to be as useful and as especially in a crisis as it could be, right? So the idea that you name things certain ways, you take an approach of naming tasks, roles, even outputs of various PXs or things that may appear in the VST, right? View system submitted tasks. That kind of thing provides you the ability. It will greatly cut down on the amount of time that is spent trying to figure out what's happening, right? But it goes back to, if I know what I built, I know why I built it that way, and then when I get to logging, I'm getting a much more, that's just a confirmation of what I should know, and helping me troubleshoot an issue. All right. So the other thing that's important about understanding the logging aspect is making sure that you get the right level of logs that's appropriate for your organization, right? So logging happens in many levels, right? So you have logging that's going to happen at the application server level, so Wildfly or WebSphere. You have logging that happens at the provisioning server, connector server, directory server levels, right? And then the endpoints, right? So now in troubleshooting an environment, an identity access management environment, you're going to need access to all those logs to figure out what goes on, right? But you also be careful, because obviously logging comes with a cost. And if you start to make decisions around logging, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we get to tuning, you are going to have to make accommodations for it. So once again, what are we building? What and how are we building it? Does come to play when we start talking about logging, because we need to make, hey, if I'm going to log X, Y, and Z more than just debug or info level or something of that nature, then I need to accommodate for it. I need to get faster. I need to get more operations per second on disks and so on, right? So we typically recommend, when we talk about logging and we talk about, an environment, for example, on the provisioning, directory servers, connector servers, we're going to say that operations per second should be at least 2K per second, right? But you should be at ideally a minimum of 3,000 to 3,500 per second, right? From a operations per second, if you're going to be logging a significant amount of information. Because if we're talking about VMs, which the majority of customers use, you're going to sacrifice something if you're not at those levels, right? We're also going to talk about, hey, the type of disk you choose. So if you use SSDs versus non-SSDs, remember there's a sacrifice you're making, especially when you're talking about things that write a lot. Now, on the directory side, which means provisioning server, user store, and the provisioning directory, right? The writing to disks for any directory data that's being committed, right, is important. LDAP traditionally is faster read than write. So you want to definitely make sure that you're accommodating these types of loads when you make choices around operations. So make sure that if you are going to go for speed and you choose something like SSDs, there is an expense, right? Usually they're a little bit more expensive than standard non-SSD technology. So make sure that you're kind of taking that in account as well. So this is the soapbox one, right, for tuning. So many customers come to us and say, hey, it's not fast enough. Fast could mean anything, right? It could mean provisioning. It could mean, completing a task in IM. It could mean, a host of things, right? So we like to take the approach that not just the app needs to be tuned, but the entire stack needs to be tuned, okay? And right now, I'm really talking about the non-VApp version of IGA when we talk about OS tuning, right? Because that's where the non-VApp version, where you have you have the ability to highly tune that without necessarily breaking it. And so we typically like to look at operating system first. So if you're going to be running Linux, we recommend using the Red Hat Performance Tuning Guide to be the basis for your tuning. And with that, you get the ability to look at, understand what connections, what OS types of locks or anything that has to do with functionality or speed and performance around that machine in the operating system, you understand. And that is, if you invest time with tuning your Linux platform that's going to run your app server, you're going to get a better result, right? Especially around connection management, any operations that are highly process intensive, you're going to definitely need, definitely see a performance gain by tuning the operating system, right? So when we also talk about Windows, right? Microsoft performance guides, and there are tons out there, not just by Microsoft, by others as well, that give you all the things you should tune. And it is important to understand that the version of Windows you get, right? You select also their different, variants of the Windows server that you get have different performance characteristics, and understand what they are and understand what benefit each of them can provide you, and obviously what your organization has access to as well, right? When we talk about tuning in general, we like to talk about connection management, right? We talk about things like idle and non-responsive connections. So in Linux world, we talk about file handles, right? Are your file handles tuned properly? Do you have enough file handles? Are they being cleared out fast enough, right? In Windows, we talk about connections in the time wait state. How do you minimize that, right? So one of the things that, two of the parameters that we often set are going to be the TCP time wait delay, and we're going to set it lower than the default of 120 seconds, and we're going to also set the strict time wait sequence, right? We're going to set that to 1 so that any of the time wait delay that we implement is enforced by Windows, right? So these are the decisions or things you have to be thinking about to make sure that your environment is running at optimal levels. So when we get to application server tuning, right, we talk about, obviously that's where identity manager, identity portal, and governance is running, right? And what are you going to focus on? You're going to focus on garbage collection, memory management, worker processes, the connections to the app server. And then you're going to say, well, Chris, where should I look to get that kind of guidance? I'm going to say Master the Boss is dedicated to Wildfly, Red Hat, obviously. And then for IBM WebSphere, going to be looking at the IBM Red Book for tuning WebSphere, right? To kind of get these recommendations. Because the good thing is, the platform leverages these industry leading, application servers, and there's tons of resources out there that give you guidance beyond the guidance that's provided in the documentation. Because the Broadcom documentation gives you, hey, this is how to make the app run better. But if you have a great running app server and you implement those, you're going to get a better result than just implementing the recommendations out of the guide. Right. So what's next? Directory. I'm a directory guy. So I love directories and I love large directories. So you can spend a significant amount of time with directories and getting things right. You can tune your cache, tune your connections, and so on, right? VM selection is very important when you talk about not just the VMs, the identity manager or directories, but your VM selection is critical to how you manage your the result that you get from your solution. So for example, if you have Azure using AWS, you know that you can always grow up to VMs, but some VMs you can't grow or a certain way. You can't add more memory, so you have to choose a different class of VMs, right? So making sure you choose the right VMs are going to be very important to what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. And in a VM selection for directories and things like that, we are going to say you're always going to be fast IO, right? You're always going to do large disks for data and log storage, and use dedicated drives for logging, right? For application servers, get VMs that are memory intense and SSD drives, right? For web proxy, we're going to use IO and processor heavy VM types, all right? And the next topic is what we call operational visibility or monitoring, right? Make sure you plan to monitor and figure out your monitoring approach. We are heavy on the idea of what's called synthetic transactions, which is kind of an end-to-end mimics user behavior, but we are also a believer in monitoring the individual components, capturing the stats for future comparisons to understand trends and build smart alerts is critical to ensuring the infrastructure is up and running. Knowing if you have a performance problem long before a customer complains is very, very important. Right? So reporting, understanding your reporting needs, understanding what type of load or what types of reports you need and the endpoints associated with it will also kind of allow you to build a better understanding of what you're going to need from a infrastructure perspective. If you're running snapshots that are heavy on various endpoints that have a lot of users or a lot of roles, that should factor in to decisions that you make going into your VM selection and tuning of your operating systems, as well as the application server. Okay. And then finally, generally operational concerns, right? Always have a dev environment, right? Is one thing. Leverage the tool over custom code wherever possible. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about Policy Express. But also password management. Make sure you understand where passwords are used and in the product and how to change them in the case that someone leaves with a password, right? How do you get access to your system without having that, the password? So make sure you document. You should always document these things, as we said in the first bullet, but make sure that you truly understand where passwords are used, what are they for, and then if you have to change them, how to change them to meet whatever security requirements that you may have as well. All right. So when we talk about identity manager, we talk about, we're talking about application server, kind of what should you do? Cluster the app server, right? High availability is essential to providing a secure identity infrastructure. Sometimes one cluster is not enough, right? Make sure that you're 2 nodes at least per cluster. We generally recommend 3 nodes, but make sure that you understand the requirements for clustering, and regardless of the application server that you use, and you approach it in a smart way, and leveraging some of the resources that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And if you are going to do clustering, make sure that you understand how clustering works, whether it's multicast, unicast, UDP based, or TCP based, right? For example, Azure doesn't support multicast, right? So you're going to have to use unicast if you're going to deploy in that infrastructure, all right? Load balancing and failover. So if you're going to be, obviously, the web proxy that diagram shows us where we are from shows us where the web proxy sits in front of these pieces, right? So if you're going to leverage IIS or Apache with the either ModJK or ISAPI redirector, make sure that you are tuning appropriately. And once again, I go back to the experts, right? Apache .org has a lot of great resources about tuning ModJK and ASAP in the ASAPI redirector, so that you get the most out of performance, you get the most out of resiliency, and so that you have an environment that's always available for your customers. So when you're doing installs, one of the key things that we see quite a bit is planning for tomorrow. Customers fail to plan for, they plan today for tomorrow, for tomorrow's updates, right? So we see customers, they take, an approach, well, nothing will ever change in their deployments. And when we talk about the application server upgrades, we talk about Java upgrades seem to come often, and you have automated patching processes, then they may end up in different drives, right? They may end up in different paths. Unlike, if you're in Linux, luckily the latest Java kind of soft link takes care of you, but in Windows, it doesn't work that way. So we often like to use soft links for Java, or soft links for something like Wildfly, so that we can replace if we're upgrading within a release without redoing configs and things of that nature, right? Makes it almost, I'm not saying portable, but it makes it easier to kind of manage over its lifespan, right? So the soft links and JDKs, and creating a soft link to say Java that points to a very specific version, that makes it easier to maintain, especially if you're looking at the standalone conf.bat, something of that nature, right? You have WebSphere. Obviously, WebSphere is a little bit different, and WebSphere has the ability to accommodate these changes more so than a Wildfly would. So understand how automated patches impact supporting components. One of the things that we see often is that customers, if they have this pathing in place correctly and they go to patch, that the patching fails. The patching fails because there is no, the application had Java open. And so once Java is shut down or the server's restarted, it can't start back up because it's missing all the supporting library. So it's important to understand how patching works. If you understand that in a dev environment, you can plan for it, you can accommodate for it. Your standard operating procedures will protect you, hopefully, if it's been documented, right? Hand me the PX, all right? And so PX is a powerful tool. We leverage PXs to handle to handle and failures and recovery from failures. Often, we really believe that there's so many things that can be done with PXs there, and they're extremely beneficial to eliminating the need for custom code, right? Can't eliminate all of it, but you can eliminate a lot of it with the use of Policy Express. And we've done everything from email retry. We use PXs as a result that fire off a scheduled bulk task to handle scenarios for customers. We use PXs in a lot of cases to replace the program exits, right? If you have program exits or using ETA util, some of those things, if you've been around for a while, we use PXs with bulk tasks to kind of get the automation and get this that implement business logic, which previously you had to be doing in a program exit. So leverage the PX wherever possible. And just on our website, we actually have an example of a PX that handles automatic email retry. So if you guys go check it out, there's one of the articles there as well. All right. Show me the data. And this is in reference to testing, right? If you don't have test data, meaning test users, test information, you can't validate a solution. And one of the things that we commonly see is that customers lack the basic test information. If you don't have this test data, I can't create users of different types. I can't validate the solution. I don't know all the scenarios, because we often talk about positive test cases. And in our last webinar, obviously we talked about testing, but the negative testing aspect is important as well to understand how the solution works. And we see that customers typically fail where they don't have good test data. And if they even have a test plan, if they don't have good test data, it doesn't work out always, right? So make sure someone shows you the data. Make sure that you get through the validation in a way that gives you assurances that it's going to perform and fail as you expect. Right? All right. So let's talk about identity governance. My little animation is broken here, but we're going to talk about understand your organization, right? So if you're going to go down the route of identity governance and in leveraging the attestation in role mining and role smart role capabilities, you need to understand your organization. Who reports to who? What are the exceptions? Who owns which application? Who owns which endpoint? And the other thing is to feed back into identity governance the results of findings. So if you're doing high trust, you're doing SOC 2 or internal security audits, right? These things are, any of the things that come out of that should feed back into, can I make my attestation better, right? A robust attestation implementation could help your organization ensure the results that and strengthen its audit compliance initiatives, right? Recently, we had a customer tell us that if they had implemented several improvements to their attestation process, they would have avoided 2 of the failures associated with their most recent high trust engagement. And this is a case where they had the tools in place, but improvements were needed and they didn't make them. All right. So what do I mean by connect first? So we see very common that organizations opt for CSVs to feed into identity governance, which is a quick way to get started. But if you can, leverage a connector server. Ideally, leverage Identity Manager if you already have it. But you want to get into a spot where you can move beyond just a pure CSV model to get the biggest bang for the buck, get resiliency out of the product, because connector servers have failovers, right? But CSVs do not, because they're single files, right? Especially if you're going to be automating a process, right? And it's hard to get away when you have undertaken a large integration effort with CSVs and all the data correlation, whether using Kettle or some other process. And that's not where you want to be stuck. It really isn't. You want to be able to automate the process, make it as maintenance free. And this goes back to earlier when we talk about planning, planning for documentation, what are we building and where we want to go, and making sure that we understand the that roadmap. And if you do go with CSVs, plan to move to connector servers, or if possible, the identity manager integration to make things easier for yourselves. All right. And if you are going to be using, if you're using unmanaged endpoints in IG, take great care in understanding the connectivity use cases that apply to your situation, right? So automation, correlation are very important, and there are different behaviors within identity governance that give you, depending on what type of connectivity case it applies to you, right? There's identity manager managed endpoints. There's mixed universe. There's a mixed universe with role modeling, right? These are different connectivity cases that you need to be kind of focused in on so that you get the breadth of knowledge that you require, obviously breadth of information you require to make the right decisions within the product, right? Safekeeping, right? So this is the archive strategy, right? So if your organization has specific archiving requirements around attestation data, those types of things, you have to make sure that you kind of comply with those, but also realize that there's actually a technical benefit for IG if you archive, right? It improves performance. It improves, it reduces that footprint on existing systems, for example, databases, and so on. So that gives you the ability to kind of keep that footprint maintained in a I guess boxed in is a better word for it. Keeps that infrastructure boxed in, and you can archive this information off to be used later or for compliance, and keep it. And just beware that if you make these types of decisions around archiving, you have to keep it for X number of years. Some organizations have to keep it 7 years or more, but make sure that you truly understand that requirement. And obviously, IG supports two types of logging, two types of archiving. One is product-based, which is all done in the tool, and the other one is client-based, all right? DB client-based, that is. So the who has what, I see a typo there, who has what strategy there is really the attestation strategy, right? We strongly believe that any attestation strategy should be based around identity as the authoritative source. It makes it so much easier to maintain and so much easier to get started. It gives you a leg up, but understand that just because you choose CSV doesn't mean you can't add the identity manager kind of model for your universe later. But we definitely understand that the strength and the power that Connected to Identity Manager provides will give your organization ability to pull in all the user accounts, all the users plus their associated accounts is a great jump start versus correlating CSV data and assembling it via external tasks or even leveraging the correlation within the product. All right. So now let's go on to Portal. Portal is not IDM. All right. So one of the things that we tell customers is minimize duplicating functionality in the portal. It's quite common to offer tasks that were previously used in IDM as a part of portal deployment. This approach allows organizations to quickly realize the value proposition the portal provides, right? But you want to make sure that, because you don't necessarily get rid of IDM if you have a mature IDM environment, the portal is just a easier interface that allows business users to navigate, right? So what we like to do is we like to leverage that rich portfolio of policy expresses and identity policies and all these things that are within Identity Manager with the portal, right? But there are going to be some exceptions, right? So when we talk about portal to IDM role management, if you have roles within identity manager, say you have 1,000 roles, those translate into target permissions, right? How do I deal with that in the portal? Currently there's no automated way to kind of suck those in through the connector, but so how do I manage that? So come up with a role strategy, a role to, access catalog to role strategy mapping process. So recently we started working with customers about talking about attribute-based access control target permissions that relate to roles so that we can leverage just attributes within the portal to map to one or many roles in Identity Manager, which really cuts down on the maintenance. They have a lot of roles. They modify roles frequently, and to constantly update the portal with the roles would be a bit of a burden. But we allow, they leverage they're going to leverage the attribute-based access control in target permissions to get a better, management experience. So it's not really for users, but it's really for the people who manage it to make it easier, right? So that's one of those examples of thinking about how roles should be handled instead of just dumping everything back into portal from Identity Manager. Leverage authentication in SSL, right? Or make sure you implement authentication model based on a standard. For example, leverage OIDC, leverage SAML. But if you have SiteMinder, portal is using SiteMinder to protect the portal is also a great way to kind of minimize any management of having a separate authentication process or having something where potentially if you have a high availability environment, if you have a SiteMinder infrastructure and you are lose a portal server and you get routed to a different server, SiteMinder session is immediately picked up without going through the authentication process again. Now, if you're using Azure or AWS for OIDC or SAML, you can achieve similar things. But if you're just doing password-based authentication, then leveraging SiteMinder gives you a benefit there. Right? So use and extend the provided use cases. So Identity Portal, hopefully most of you guys know that it's repository for those things. And that repository of use cases or samples in the marketplace give you a good basis for learning how things work. Use them, learn from them, and to model what you want to do. It's a great benefit in that regard, because you can cut down on a lot of the should it work this way or not. You can leverage the onboarding use case, right, to figure that out. Integration considerations, right? So when you look at going through integration, we're talking about integration with Identity Manager for the most part, understanding that if you move between environments, a dev to a prod, for example, you're going to end up with, when you export connector information in these exports, hey, that doesn't match the prod one. So be aware of these types of things, right? And this goes back to naming. If I name that connector the same in dev and prod, that makes it easier, right? But understand what the considerations are when you're going to start, when you integrate with the portal with things like Identity Manager or Identity Governance, once again, where the connector name matters when you're exporting objects, right? So the one thing I can say for directory is plan for growth. Estimate the number of users, attributes per user, average size of each attribute, and then pad your estimate, your best estimate by 30%, right? And then track the growth of the user store with monitoring tools, right? Schema did namespace, right? So Tim Howells wrote a great book many years ago called Understanding LDAP, and that's kind of the Bible around LDAP. And I encourage you, if you're going to do any work in this space, to kind of use, a guide like that to help you understand how LDAP works. Obviously, CA directory is X500, but there are a lot of principles that are in that guide because there is LDAP, obviously CA directory is LDAP interface, but a lot of principles in that book that will help you understand how to make the right decisions regarding this, right? And I will tell you the other thing that you want to do no matter what is, if you're using the non-VAP version of IGA, always include the IGA based schema into your schema, your customized schema, always, because you're going to be able to take advantage of functionalities and feature sets that you may not think about today. But if you don't have that schema available, it may be more work than you want to take on. But that assumes that you're going to eliminate some of the overlapping when you do that aggregation of schema, right? So DS routers are our friends. We talk about high availability, we talk about resilience, we talk about allowing us to grow easily, planning for the future. Then creating a DSA router infrastructure that within a data center, across data centers, or across regions, zones, whatever it may be, gives us an immense amount of flexibility from a reference perspective. So we point IGA and Identity Manager, all these things to these two routers, and the routers can have one or more DSAs behind them, and I can simplify my growth strategy, right? Instead of trying to incorporate all the different DSAs that may come and go over time, move from one server to another, routers allow me to be very flexible and not having to touch all of the clients that are associated. Okay. Use access control templates to make it easier for you guys to get in and out of a directory, or if you lose access and you need to change controls, always have an anonymous, no open template ready to switch in for access control to get access to data in case you do lose access with a lost password or administrator. Log carefully and keep your eyes open. So you want to make sure that if you do log for directory, what are you logging? How much are you logging? Are you logging anything sensitive? And if you are logging things sensitive, make sure that you are taking care of that data. If you have something like, PAM, right? You can lock down a machine to kind of protect those logs and things of that nature as a value add. But still, obviously, you want to log as the least amount of sensitive or PII, PHI data as possible, right? And monitor the logs, right? Use tools like NXLog and various aggregators to look at and scrape the logs for valuable information, such as CPU starvation when it comes to CA directory, Symantec directory. Sorry. Okay. So recap: everything doesn't work for everybody, right? But every environment is not the same. And when you look at these kind of laundry lists that we went through, and to kind of tip of the iceberg of the things we typically talk about, these are general recommendations that should be more, guiding points or areas of investigation. And if you take on topics like this, and document what you do, document why you made certain decisions, because the circumstances will change, right? That will help you get through, establishing and maintaining an environment that is robust, that's reliable, and provides your customers with the best experience possible. And make sure that you're always looking at, that general best practices where we had documentation, we had tuning. Those are just not, those are you must-haves. You always should be doing those things. and whatever makes it easier. Some people do for documentation, some people do a traditional Word doc, some people do a Teams channel that has more of a blogging function that works too. Anything that makes it easier, right? And then make sure that you consider the technical best practices, that were included. And if you figure out what makes sense for you and how to get the best result today, just keep in mind that these best practices are going to change as new versions of the product come out, as new operating systems change, as new, all the supporting components change. These evolve, and so these are living, right? Because some of these recommendations weren't even a topic 7 years ago, and when for this solution, but they're topics now because this is where we are. So the goal obviously is just to make your solution faster and more resilient, and so that it provides the value that your organization expects. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob.
Yes, I see there's one question in the queue, and so if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and enter them now. We have some time to answer them, and I'll give you the first one. It's is there a way to tune the V app?
There are, so a lot of things come, there are a lot of things that are predetermined in that. And I'm going to defer, I would defer that, Rob, probably back to someone in support, because we haven't really addressed that in recently around the tuning. We do,
Okay.
because there are requirements, there are things that you don't want to touch, right? Because if you touch it, you break the V app, right? So I would say open a support case to really discuss what can be tuned and where, because it's a process that is, as they upgrade operating systems, because I just think when they went to 14.4, it was a brand new operating system underneath the V app, right? So I know things do change, but.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions in there right now. So I will just put in closing remarks, and then if anything comes in, I'll pop it in there for you. I just want to remind everyone that if you're in the northeast part of the United States, we are having an event on September 29th at the Mohegan Sun. I put a handout in a flyer for this event that's in the handouts. I also put a link in the chat. As well as I want to let you guys know that there are 2 new videos that we just uploaded, product management sent over, for helping to actually migrate the V app. One shows a side-by-side migration, the other one's a gradual migration. If you're running the V app, I would highly encourage you to go check out both videos, and they would help you a lot. And I think I also put those links as well in the chat. So those links are also there. If you have any other questions, either for Chris or myself on any of the content in this webinar that you think about later, you can reach out to me, or I see Chris put his email address up there. Mine is just robert.marty@broadcom.com, and it's Marty with an I, not a Y. And we'll see you guys all in probably in October for the 3rd of this series, and maybe November, we'll see. So thank you all for attending, and have a great day.